The historic Hudson Valley was stumbled upon by Henry Hudson in 1609 while trying to find a shorter passage to China. The Hudson Valley is a large area of New York, steeped in large quantities of history. Sitting just above New York City, the Hudson Valley has been a prominent region since the Revolutionary War. The most striking features of the Hudson Valley are its rolling hills, the great mountains, and the plentiful hiking trails that are scattered throughout. Today, the hiking trails that cover the face of the Hudson Valley are among its most beloved features. These trails offer visitors an opportunity to explore the past and walk throughout history. Situated right outside the town of Beacon, Mount Beacon is one of the most frequented trails in the Hudson Valley. Its unique past and breathtaking views make Mount Beacon a popular destination.
History plays a big part in the city of Beacon, and the Incline Railway was one of the major contributors to Beacon's growth and evolution as a city. So the Incline was built in 1901, 1902, and its purpose was to bring people to the top of Mount Beacon. It climbs 1,540 feet. The ride up took about 4.5 minutes. Each car carried around 40 some people. You know, the first year there was 20,000 people. By 1927, which is considered the peak of its use, was over 100,000. Over the years, a series of fires took place, and with each fire, it caused more financial hardship and more financial stress. By 1976, this top parcel was lost in a tax default. And unfortunately, by 1983, there was a tragic fire that destroyed all of the remaining structures, and so that put the end to that. In 2013, most of the land that Scenic Hudson had up here was incorporated into what's called the New York State Hudson Highland Park. When I first moved to Beacon, I took a tour with the Mount Beacon Incline Railway Society and learned about their mission and their vision, and really wanted to volunteer my services and see what I could do to help. The plans are to restore a fully functional incline using the exact same footprint that the original incline used, meaning we'll follow the tracks the same way, but we'll do so in a more modern and relevant way to the community. There's a giant trail network up here that connects this part of Mount Beacon all the way into the Hudson Highland State Park. So from up here, you can walk all the way down to Cold Spring, going up and down the ridges. So there's hundreds of miles of trails. There's a reservoir that you can visit. There's a fire tower that you can visit. And there's lots of scenic vistas throughout the trail network they're really, really breathtaking. I think everyone in the city of Beacon has a special relationship with the mountain. It's really wonderful to be able to come up during all seasons and be able to see the vistas in all different light and seasons and colors. It's a unique mountain. It's unique that it's right on, literally on the doorsteps of the city of Beacon, and you can walk out your front steps and be here in a short walk, really.
Spectacles like Mount Beacon attract wealthy and powerful families to the Hudson Valley. One of the most prominent families was the Livingstons, who settled upon the banks of the river before the Revolutionary War.
Livingston family in America started about 1675 when Robert Livingston would later become the first Lord of Livingston Manor. When he arrived here, he quickly rose in ranks in the colony, and in 1686 was given the patent for Livingston Manor. Claremont Estate was established in 1728 when it was broken off from Livingston Manor. The house itself was built about 1740 by Robert Livingston, commonly known as Robert the Builder. When Robert the Builder was given the property, the 13,000 acres, he wasn't satisfied with that and began negotiating for more and more land, and he'd acquired about 500,000 acres across the river. The Livingstons were involved in the revolutionary movement from its very beginning, but the most influential member of the family during that period was Robert the Judge's son, Robert the Chancellor, who was a member of the Continental Congress in 1775. The following year, he was a member of the Committee to Five, along with John Adams, Ben Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Thomas Jefferson to draft the Declaration of Independence. Later in the war, he became the Secretary for Foreign Affairs, the equivalent of the Secretary of State today. In 1777, the British came up and burned Kingston, and then they came here on October 17th and burned both Claremont as well as 24 outbuildings. Following the burning in 1777, the Chancellor's mother, Margaret, started to campaign to have her house rebuilt. She succeeded, and the house was livable again. In 1782, George Washington visited the house. Turned out the general was looking to travel up the river to see other military posts, and when George returned, they stayed another night. The property's heyday probably came in the 1790s when it was essentially Robert the Chancellor's experimental farm. He also experimented with turning elk into draft animals, which didn't go so well. In the 1920s and 30s, the family suffered from a fairly common aristocratic problem as they started to run out of money, which meant parceling off pieces of the land. The property was very depleted, and it was about that time, I think, that they began to think about transferring the house. The official transfer happened in 1960 when Alice Livingston signed the house over, although she and her daughters would have lifelong tenancies here. At that point, the park was expanded to its full size now, which is about 500 acres. The site includes over 5 miles of trails, some of which you can get great views of the river, and some of them also include highlights from history. I grew up very close to here. We weren't taught a lot about this stuff. It was only later that I realized what an important role that my hometown had played in the Revolution and the founding of this country. The Revolutionary War didn't happen far away, it happened right here.
The Livingston family's presence is still felt throughout the Hudson Valley region by their impressive mansion at Staatsburg.
The first Staatsburg was built about 1795 by a Revolutionary War veteran named Morgan Lewis. It burned in 1832. Morgan Lewis was still alive, and he rebuilt in 1832 the big 25-room Greek Revival mansion here. When you walk through the door, it's like walking back in time. It's like walking into 1900. You walk in the door, and there are the Mills's original amazing furnishings. You really see a way of life that existed in the Hudson Valley 100 years ago. The Mills has used the property for sports. So across the street, for example, was the golf course that they owned. Mr. Mills had a hobby farm across the street where he raised prize Jersey cows. They had a huge greenhouse complex here. There were carriage barns for riding horses and other barns for the working horses. Some of the employees of the estate had homes on the grounds. The house was owned by Ruth Livingston Mills, not her husband. Ruth owned the house. Ruth's family, the Livingstons, were wealthy landowners in the Hudson Valley going back to the 1600s. Ruth Livingston married Ogden Mills. His money was in railroads and banking. His father had gone west in the gold rush and started banking. He sold tools to the miners, and with the proceeds started the Bank of D.O. Mills. It became the Bank of California and eventually the Bank of America. Oh, really? There are different branches of the family. So Ruth Livingston Mills, well, it's her relatives at Claremont. Ruth is bragging about her family heritage. When you walk into this mansion, you see portraits of the Claremont Livingstons there. You know, she's bragging that we're not Johnny-come-latelys. We've been important in America for a long time. Other than the mansion, I think the waterfront is the most popular, with just breathtaking views across the Hudson River all the way to the Catskills. Okay. I would say that the maids' quarters in the attic are my favorite part. And the maids' quarters is unrestored, very evocative little rabbit warren of rooms. And when you stand there in the semi-darkness of this unrestored area, you can imagine what a hub of activity it was when it was filled with the maids. Tell every visitor. One fun fact, the Millses had tickets to sail on the Titanic. Fortunately for them, they had tickets for the second trip. And of course, the Titanic never made a second trip.
Despite its trials and tribulations, the Hudson Valley has stood the test of time. Its notable inhabitants and their past contributions have made the Hudson Valley the historic destination that it is today.